Alright guys, Murph's here, and today I want to talk about pinned and welded barrels. What's the point? Now in order to talk about this, we do have to bring some legal terms into focus so that we can better understand where pinned and welded barrels come from to begin with. So, in 1934, the National Firearms Act was signed into being, and this delineated certain regulations for specific types of firearms, including short barrel rifles. And the cutoff point for designating something as a short barreled rifle was 16 inches. Anything over 16 inches would not be within the purview of the NFA. And anything shorter than that would then require a $200 tax stamp, additional regulations by the ATF, blah, 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 blah. Now, how do we derive that measurement? I don't want to get full on in like all the measurement type portions as much as like where is the muzzle end? Where does a barrel end at? And for most barrels, that is at the threaded end. And that is because legally you cannot account for the different types of muzzle devices that could be added to the threaded end. And since those can be readily removed, replaced, exchanged, it's also not a consistent point to be able to derive a measurement from. And of course, whenever it is that we're talking about legalese, we have to identify some type of consistency in order to be able to actually follow the letter of the law. So, most manufacturers build their barrels out to 16.1 inches. That's where the threading occurs, and then you have your additional length of a muzzle device and all that kind of stuff, be it a muzzle brake, flash hider, whatever it may be. That is considered to be the legal length, the manufactured length of that barrel. Things change, however, when you switch to pinned and welding, because if you were to take a shorter than 16-inch barrel and then pinned and weld some sort of spacer to bring it out to 16 inches, at that point you have a legal 16-inch barrel, because unlike your average threaded muzzle device, you cannot easily remove something that has been pinned and welded. You have to heat up that barrel. You have to bring in tools and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to overpower the weld. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, as opposed to just grabbing your AR-15 wrench and cranking off the muzzle device that you had on there previously, like you would with a normal 16-inch barrel. So once it becomes pinned and welded, it is considered to be a manufactured portion of that barrel that cannot be readily modified. So you'll see a wide variety of lengths. You'll see 14.5 pinned and welded, 13.7, 13.5, 13, all the way down to like some submachine gun type builds. Now, you'll see these sometimes on like Michiko's channel, where somebody got like an old Thompson or an old Uzi kit and they rebuilt it. And when they put the barrel in, they could either put in a 16-inch barrel, kind of like how Uzis were imported once upon a time, or they could weld some sort of spacer on there, be it a faux suppressor or something along those lines, in order to be able to account for the difference in length between, you know, an 8-inch barrel out to the 16-inch barrel. That way they don't have to do NFA paperwork at that point. So the question becomes, what are the advantages of going with a pinned and welded over just a standard barrel length, just a standard 16-inch barrel? And to be completely honest, if you asked me about this at different times in my life, I would give you completely different answers. A couple of years ago, I would tell you that a pinned and weld barrel is completely pointless, that you're still stuck at 16 inches. So yes, your rifled portion of your barrel might be shorter than 16 inches, but the overall length still comes out right on to 16 inches, which doesn't make it any more portable. It's kind of like the difference between going from a 16-inch to a 14.5-inch barrel. There's not a lot of difference there. That 14.5 barrel did not all of a sudden become a better CQB option, as opposed to going from a 20-inch barrel to a 16-inch barrel. That's actually a significant change. Or going from a 20-inch barrel down to a 10.3-inch barrel. That's a big difference whenever it is that you're talking about working in confined spaces. A 17.1-inch barrel, let's say, if we're accounting for muzzle device, versus a 16-inch barrel, not that an actual pinned and weld 16-inch flush right at 16-inch barrel, does not make that big of a difference in a confined space. And you're losing stuff. You're losing velocity, because now once that bullet enters that space that has been added on there in order to be able to get it to 16 inches, you now have gas blow by. It's not getting any additional velocity out of those pressures. And you're also losing rifling, so you're not even necessarily getting more stabilization depending on what type of projectile and twist rate and stuff like that you're working with in your rifle. So you still have the length, and you don't have the maneuverability, tangible benefits of a shorter overall barrel, just so that you can not do some NFA paperwork. Okay, that doesn't really equal out to me in that case when I first assessed this type of information. Now, eventually, I went to kind of a disinterested stance on it, where like, well, you know, if it makes you happy, then go for it. You know, if you got if you were doing like a some sort of like SOP mod Mach 2 build or you know, a M4A1 or something along those lines, you're trying to replicate maybe a rifle that you served with or something along those lines, then yeah, sure, a 14.5-inch barrel that you then pin and weld just a slightly longer muzzle device in order to make it 16 inches to keep from having to do NFA paperwork. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, I get it. I understand what it is that you're going for there. Maybe you're doing like a Vietnam Car 15 build and you don't want to, you know, that does not constitute the amount of interest that you would need to make that an SBR, but you still want to have the build. So pin and welding a muzzle device out to the obligatory 16 inches makes sense, especially when you look at the kind of like flash hider sort of suppressor combination that used to come on those rifles back then. It works. You still get the aesthetic without having to do additional paperwork, additional cost, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I understand. I could get what it is that you're getting at that point. Or in general, if the rifle just looks cool, it gives you that giggle factor. One of the benefits that I can say when you go with like the 13-inch barrels and you pin and weld like a blast forwarding device, well, normally on a very short barrel, you would have a lot of muzzle flash, especially if you're talking about like a 5.56 or 7.62 by 3.9. A blast forwarding device will give you a better relationship with breaking up some of that muzzle blast because it gives a space for that muzzle flash to occur so that you don't necessarily have as much of a signature at night or something along those lines. Okay, though that's, you know, whatever floats your boat type of deal. I'm not going to yuck your yum. What about now? How has my opinion changed now? And actually, a lot of this stems back to when I did my review on the CMMG Mutant in the Friendly Fire series, which if you're interested in that, I'll throw the link in the description. That was an AKS-13. So it had a 13-inch barrel with a blast forwarding device pinned and welded in place and rails that came up around it. And one of the things that I found really interesting about that rifle was the balance point. Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I like short, handy rifles. I like carbines like the M1 carbine. I'm a huge fan of SBRs or anything that gets very close to approximating an SBR. One of the things that I really look for is balance. And something that I noticed in that CMMG Mutant was that, yes, I still had a full-length rifle going on there. I still had a 16-inch gun, but a barrel accounts for weight in a very different way. Barrels are very dense, even when you go with a lightweight profile and all that kind of stuff. That's a very narrow area where you're developing a lot of weight, which can really change the balance point of a rifle. So when you eliminate that and you replace it with lightweight handguards and just a muzzle device of some sort, even though that stuff is still adding weight, it's not adding as much weight as if you had barrel and then also those materials running all the way alongside that barrel as well. And it really does change the balance point of the rifle. And what do I mean by balance point? Like, what are we talking about right here? When you have a lot of weight forward on your rifle, that changes your ability to be able to transition between targets. It takes more energy to get that muzzle started, and then it also takes more energy to stop that muzzle, which is going to be reflected in splits and stuff like that. There's also very tangible implications whenever it talks about fatigue. So taking this IWI Galil Ace, for example, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. There's not a lot of weight on the back end of this rifle. This is a very lightweight stock. So the majority of my weight preference goes towards the muzzle. And that was before I even threw this very heavy Streamlight ProTac with laser light on here. So already the handguard and all that kind of stuff accounted for a very muzzle heavy bias on this particular rifle. I added the light on, it became more so. So I've taken this to courses, and doing a lot of stuff like off the shoulder when it came to reloads and all that kind of thing was very fatiguing on my arm. Like, this became a lot to hold up here very quickly. which is why I prefer the balance point on, say, like this IWI X95 Tavor, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. All of the weight is back towards the butt here. So when it comes to doing off-shoulder type stuff, it's pretty easy. Like the rifle wants to be right here to begin with. And when it comes to transitioning between targets, it's very easy to get this thing started and to stop it. Whereas if I was skeet shooting or something along those lines, like shooting trap or shooting skeet or something like that, I might want a little bit longer barrel on my shotgun in order to be able to follow through on that particular target because I'm trying to shoot a moving target. Whereas if I'm doing L-Pres drills or something along those lines, being able to push and drive that rifle from target to target, it's better to have, in my opinion, that rear weight bias. That's something that I kind of noticed about the Mutant. Now, in that review, I didn't necessarily get a chance to do a lot of like more advanced shooting drills and stuff like that. The rifle had kind of was borrowed from a friend, had been kind of relegated to his background. He'd stripped a lot of stuff off of it to be able to throw onto other builds, and the iron sights he had on it were not zeroed. So I actually spent most of my shooting footage for that review trying to get those sights zeroed. And it just had iron sights on it. Didn't have an optic, didn't have a light or anything along those lines, which would have changed a lot of the aspects of the balance point of that rifle. But another aspect of whenever it is that you're talking about transitioning through targets is not just weight distribution, but also how it is that you can grip the rifle. So take this Mark 12 MOD Murph build, previously reviewed on the channel, links in the description because I also have recently done an update video. This is an 18-inch barrel. It's a fairly long rifle. However, this is a lightweight handguard. I have a little bit more weight on the stock back here, and this rifle is very balanced. I absolutely love how this rifle has distributed its weight. And one of the great things about this longer handguard and all that kind of stuff is I can get out there on this rifle with that kind of thumb overbore grip and all that kind of stuff, and we can see that I'm not really chicken winging my arm in order to do so, which allows me to be able to have a good fulcrum whenever it is pivoting between targets with this particular rifle. Now, when you go with short setups, you wind up having to chicken wing a little bit more, and that kind of changes not just fatigue, but also the dynamic of being able to get that rifle started. So the same kind of thing with the Tavor. You know, I gotta chicken wing my arm a little bit more in order to be able to start and stop the rifle to be able to drive through different targets and all that kind of stuff. With a pinned and welded design, especially on that CMMG Mutant, by having the handguards go all the way out to the end of the blast forwarding device and all that kind of stuff, I still get that long presentation. I'm still able to drive that muzzle how it is that I need to while having a more balanced rifle at a longer length. That's something that I noticed. Now, to caveat off of that, because this is a contextual channel, the vast majority of people would not notice this as a benefit. Your average shooter only shoots a couple hundred rounds a year. They make a handful of trips out to the range. They don't do high round count drills. They don't go to courses. They don't go to competitions. They probably just, shoot the gun to hear it go off, maybe shoot some groups and stuff like that, mess around with their friends out on the range, which is fine. There is nothing wrong with being a casual shooter. We sometimes lose focus of that, especially when you're talking about like YouTube channels, Instagram influencers, and all that kind of stuff. People get really bent around the axle of being like, well, you got to get ready for your worst day. And, when the Russians start falling from the sky, what is it? Are you going to be prepared? What are you going to do? Not everybody's like that. And that's okay. That's completely fine. Some people just want to go out and have fun, and they should be able to. So I do think the advantages of a pinned and welded barrel are lost on the vast majority of people. But if you're somebody who is looking to push that envelope and looking to get into those different types of aspects of more proficient shooting, that might be something that's worthwhile to look into. Okay, Murph. So with that being the case, what's your resolution on this? Are pinned and welded barrels worth it? How do you break that down in your mind now? So for me, my interest in pinned and welded has a point. If you're talking about a 13.7 to a 14.5 inch build, I would much rather go ahead and do pinned and welded because it's so close that it's not worth it to me to do the additional paperwork, get the tax stamp, the added cost, and then having to go through putting in a 5320.20 every time I want to cross a state border. Especially because the ATF's not been doing a good job of approving my 5320.20s in an appropriate amount of time. It's actually a huge issue for me right now because I've put in two 5320.20s in the last like 6 months as of the filming of this video, and neither one of them got approved on time. Now, one of those was my fault because I messed up the dates on it, and I sent in, once they emailed me back and were like, hey, these dates are not right, like they've already passed, I sent them a corrected one. I got the messed up one disapproved in the mail just prior to the start of travel and still have not received the updated one. So, and travel was a couple of weeks ago. Like, I could not take my NFA item with me because I didn't have that paperwork. And that's really getting on my nerves right now, especially because I put that in well in advance. That was a rabbit hole. We're gonna get back on topic here. So if I'm looking at a 13.7 to a 14.5, I'll go ahead and pin and weld. I'll avoid all of those issues. And I did so, well, not necessarily a build, but I did purchase this DD M4A1 Chambered 556, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. This is a 14.5 pinned and welded barrel. Very big fan, actually, of the weight distribution on this rifle. If you want more about that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. However, if I'm looking at like a 13.5 and below, I'm at that point looking at doing NFA paperwork. I have no issue with SBRs. I own 2 SBRs as of the filming of this video. I fully intend to add more in the future. I've actually long fantasized about a 12.5 to 13.5 inch AR build that would be like a really good dual SBR. Maybe a suppressor host, you know, maybe make that like my night fighter or something along those lines. Like I've had a couple of different builds that have been bouncing around in my head that constitute kind of around even as low as like 11.5 and not doing a pinned and weld. In the course of prepping for this video and thinking about like pinned and welded and really getting into like the different handling characteristics and dynamics and all that kind of stuff, I have thrown some consideration that maybe something like that CMMG Mutant with that blast forwarding device put into place and the longer handguards and all that kind of stuff could still have some tangible benefits that I could look into. You know, I really did enjoy how that rifle moved. So that's something, you know, all concepts on this channel are always developing. I continually research and study these different types of aspects in order to better focus my overall discussion and concept. So, you know, you ask me about this in a year from now, I could very well have a very different opinion. And I'm open to that idea because it's important for us to continue to push our own envelopes and think critically and challenge ourselves on what it is that we give advice for, what it is that we tell ourselves in order to make sure that we're giving ourselves the best options out on the market. Or taking advantage of the best options out on the market. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.
Stand by. Go.